This is The Week in Addiction Medicine, a podcast resource of timely news and top stories brought to you by the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM.
Today is Tuesday, June 9th, and I'm Zach Caruso. Our lead story this week is in the American Journal of Public Health and is titled Tobacco Industry Contributions to the Development of Ultraprocessed Food in the United States, 1985 to 2007, a case study of Lunchables. Tobacco firms began acquiring U.S. food companies in the 1960s to 1990s to increase revenues and leverage research and development across holdings in tobacco, alcohol, and ultraprocessed foods, or UPF subsidiaries. In this case study, the authors examined the development of Lunchables following Phillip Morris' acquisition of Kraft and General Foods. Phillip Morris applied a, quote, consumer-driven product development strategy previously used for tobacco in the development process to maximize consumer appeal. Phillip Morris also used technologies from Kraft and General Foods to make lower-nicotine cigarettes and then low-fat versions of Lunchables in a, quote, better-for-you strategy to preserve market share in the face of health concerns about both products. The authors suggest public health strategies and policies used to address tobacco could be expanded to UPFs to reduce harm to children. Next is an article in Addiction and is titled Charting the Decline of the Fourth Wave, U.S. Overdose Deaths by Race, Ethnicity, and Substance Involvement. This population-based study of national death records aims to characterize decreases in overdose death rates in the United States between 2023 and 2024 by race/ethnicity and substance involvement. Researchers found that all four previously defined waves of the U.S. overdose crisis appear to be in decline, as deaths involving illicit fentanyl with and without stimulants dropped sharply between 2023 and 2024. Concurrently, the fraction of overdose deaths involving stimulants without fentanyl and those involving xylazine continued to increase. While racial disparities in drug overdose death rates narrowed slightly during this period, large gaps remain, with the highest overdose death rates among American Indian, Alaska Native, and Black individuals. Our next article is also in Addiction and is titled Associations Between Modes of Cannabis Use and Cannabis Use Disorder, Evidence from the 2022 to 2023 United States National Survey on Drug Use and Health. This cross-sectional study analyzed data from the 2022 to 2023 National Survey on Drug Use and Health to estimate the association between modes of cannabis use and past-year cannabis use disorder. Of all respondents who reported past-year cannabis use, 53% reported multimodal cannabis use. The overall prevalence of CUD was 30%, however, this varied by mode of use. Respondents who reported oral/mucosal-only cannabis use had a CUD rate of 4% compared to 40% with multimodal use, 24% with smoke-only use, and 28% with dab-only use. The highest CUD odds were among those using smoke plus vape plus oral/mucosal plus dab compared to oral/mucosal plus topical use. Our next article is in Substance Use and Addiction Journal and is titled Expanding Methadone Access Through Community Pharmacies, a qualitative study exploring opioid treatment program staff perceptions of pharmacy-based medication units. Methadone for OUD is limited to opioid treatment programs, or OTP, which can in turn limit access in much of the country. Proposals to expand access have included a federal law allowing prescribing by addiction specialists, but these proposals have not advanced. State regulations in North Carolina would allow pharmacies to act as medication units, functioning as satellite sites for OTPs. The authors conducted qualitative research among OTP staff to ascertain perceptions about an OTP pharmacy collaboration. While OTP staff identified increased access as a benefit and were generally supportive, they also raised concerns about potential stigma in pharmacies and loss of access to counseling and other services offered in OTPs. The staff also noted potential facilitators for implementation included telehealth, reimbursement changes, and communication between OTPs and pharmacies. Next is an article in JAMA Network Open and is titled Naloxone and Clinical Outcomes in Suspected Opioid-Associated Out-of-Hospital Cardiac Arrests. Recent studies estimate 17% of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests, or OHCA, involve drug overdose. Data were obtained from a California EMS database for 2021 to 2022. Standard criteria indicating opioid-associated OHCA were found in 3,800 patients, and 33% of these received naloxone. Patients who received naloxone compared to those who did not had higher probability of survival to hospital discharge, favorable neurologic outcomes at discharge, and return of spontaneous circulation. Similar favorable results were found in the group who received naloxone because EMS suspected opioid involvement. Naloxone even improved outcomes in the entire group of OHCA. However, in OHCA where epinephrine was administered, naloxone provided no benefit. The authors suggest a randomized trial of naloxone in opioid-suspected OHCA. Next is an article in the Journal of Addiction Medicine titled A Comparison of Neuropsychological Functioning Between Patients with Opioid Use Disorder Treated with Extended-Release Naltrexone or Buprenorphine Naloxone. Employees with OUD and safety-sensitive jobs may be prohibited from MOUD treatment with methadone or buprenorphine. Most studies with methadone show some cognitive impairment. This study assessed the cognitive effects of buprenorphine by comparing cognitive test scores for patients receiving sublingual buprenorphine naloxone or BUP-NX with long-acting naltrexone or XR-NTX. Data were obtained from the XBOT study where 2 cognitive tests were administered at baseline and weeks 4, 8, 16, and 24. On the trail-making test, the scores were XR-NTX 37.53, BUP-NX 37.89, difference 0.26. On the Stroop word color test, the scores were XR-NTX 56.54, BUP-NX 56.22, difference 0.33. The authors suggest that BUP-NX has no significant effect on cognition and may be acceptable in safety-sensitive jobs. Our next article is in Translational Psychiatry and is titled Using Deep Learning to Identify Brain Networks Mediating Cognitive and Motor Impairments in Alcohol Use Disorder. AUD, which affects 29% of individuals over a lifetime in the U.S., is linked to impairments in visuospatial working memory, executive function, and motor control. The study used a data-driven deep learning approach to distinguish individuals with AUD from controls by integrating resting state functional MRI connectivity data with cognitive and motor performance measures. The model identified 16 brain networks mapped to neuropsychological functions and grouped them into 14 functional units. The temporal attention network fully mediated the impact of AUD on spatial working memory, attention, set shifting, and motor performance, while the sensory motor network additionally mediated motor-related deficits. These findings demonstrate distinct brain behavior relationships underlying AUD-related impairments and were replicated in an independent cohort, supporting their robustness. Our final article is in BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth and is titled The Comparative Effects of Prenatal Exposure to Methadone versus Buprenorphine for Opioid Use Disorder on Neonatal Outcomes, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. The systematic review and meta-analysis evaluated the impacts of methadone and buprenorphine on neonatal health outcomes, particularly preterm birth, low birth weight, small for gestational age, stillbirth, neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome or NOWS diagnosis, and NOWS treatment. A total of 27 studies were included, with 22 observational studies, 4 randomized clinical trials or RCTs, and 1 RCT/observational study. Within these studies, there were a total of 14,900 individuals exposed to buprenorphine and 8,300 exposed to methadone. Buprenorphine was associated with lower risk of preterm birth, low birth weight, small for gestational age, and NOWS treatment. There were no differences in NOWS diagnosis or stillbirth between groups. The study was limited due to lack of adjustment for potential confounding or timing, duration, and dosage of exposure to each regimen in the majority of the included studies. This concludes today's episode of This Week in Addiction Medicine. Remember to subscribe to the ASAM Weekly for more exclusive content and our editor's commentary delivered every Tuesday. Be sure to check us out on social media and at asam.org. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.